16. When mathematical propositions refer to reality, they are not certain. When they are certain, they do not refer to reality. Albert Einstein. Up until now, the Navidson record has focused principally on the effects the house has had on others, how Holloway became murderous and suicidal, Tom drank himself into oblivion, Reston lost his mobility, Sheriff Axnard went into a state of denial, Karen fled with the children, and Navidson grew increasingly more isolated and obsessed. No consideration, however, has been given to the house as it relates purely to itself. Examined, then, from as objective a point of view as possible, the house offers these incontrovertible facts. 1.0 No light. Chapters 1 and 4 to 13. 2.0 No humidity. Chapters 1 and 5 to 13. 3.0 No air movement, i.e. breezes, drafts, etc. Chapters 1 and 5 to 13. 4.0 Temperature remains at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, plus or minus 8 degrees. Chapter 9. 5.0 No sounds. 5.1 Except for a dull roar which arises intermittently, sometimes seeming far off, sometimes sounding close at hand. Chapters 5, 7, and 9 to 13. 6.0 Compasses do not function there. Chapter 7. 6.1 Nor do altimeters. Chapter 7. 6.2 Radios have a limited range. Chapters 7 to 13. 7.0 Walls are uniformly black with a slightly ashen hue. Chapters 1 and 4 to 13. 8.0 There are no windows, moldings, or other decorative elements. See 7.0. Chapter 9. 9.0 Size and depth vary enormously. Chapters 1, 4 to 7, and 9 to 13. 9.1 The entire place can instantly and, without apparent difficulty, change its geometry. Chapters 1, 4 to 7, and 9 to 13. 9.2 Some have suggested the dull roar, or growl, is caused by these metamorphoses. See 5.1. Chapter 7. 9.3 No end has been found there. Chapters 5 to 13. 10.0 The place will purge itself of all things, including any item left behind. Chapters 9 to 13. 10.1 No object has ever been found there. Chapters 1, 4 to 7, and 9 to 13. 10.2 There is no dust. Chapter 11. 11.0 At least 3 people have died inside. Chapters 10 and 13. 11.1 Jed Leader, Holloway Roberts, and Tom Navidson. 11.2 Only one body was recovered. See 10.0. Chapter 13. Where objective data is concerned, this was all Navidson had to work with. Once he left the house, however, he began to consider new evidence, namely the collected wall samples. In lush color, Navidson captures those time-honored representations of science: test tubes bubbling with boric acid, reams of computer paper bearing the black ink weight of analysis, electron microscopes resurrecting universes out of dust, and mass spectrometers with retractable Faradays and stationary Balzars humming in some dim approximation of life. In all these images there is a wonderful sense of security. The labs are clean, well lit, and ordered. Computers seem to print with a purpose. Various instruments promise answers, even guarantees. Still, in order to make sure all this apparatus does not come across as too sterile, Navidson also includes shots of the life support system, a Krupp's coffee maker hissing and bubbling, an Oasis poster taped to the vending machine, Homer Simpson on the lounge TV saying something to his brother Herbert. As a favor to Reston, petrologist Mel O'Geary, up at the Princeton Geology Department, has agreed to donate his spare time and oversee the examination of all the wall samples. Prone toward bird-like gestures, he is a slight man who takes great delight in speaking very quickly. For nearly 4 months, he has analyzed every piece of matter, all the way from A, taken a few feet into the first hallway, to taken by Navidson when he found himself alone at the bottom of the spiral staircase. It is not an inexpensive undertaking, and while the university has agreed to fund most of it, apparently Navidson also had to throw in a fair amount himself. Note 337. The actual sum is never made clear in the film. Tina Leeson estimates Navidson's contributions were anywhere from a few $100s to a few thousand. The High Cost of Dating, by Tina Leeson, Radiogram, Volume 13, Number 4, October 1994, page 142. Endnote 337. Setting out all the sample bottles on a long table, Dr. Ojiri provides the camera with a summation of his findings, casually gesturing to various groupings while he sips coffee from a Garfield mug. What we have here is a nice banquet of igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphic samples, some granular, possibly gabbro and pyroxenite, some with much less grain, possibly trachyte or andesite. The sedimentary group is fairly small, samples F through K, mainly limestone and marl. The metamorphic group predominates with traces of amphibolite and marble. But this group here, it's composed primarily of siderites, which is to say heavy in iron, though you also have the aerolites, rich in silicon and magnesium oxides. 2 pages missing. Techniques. Note 338. Radiometric dating includes work with carbon-14 from a few hundred years to 50,000 years ago, potassium-argon for dates ranging from 100,000 years to 4.5 times 10 to the 9 years ago, rubidium-strontium from 5 times 10 to the 7 to about 4.5 times 10 to the 9 years ago, lead isotopes from 10 to the 8 to 4.5 times 10 to the 9 years ago, as well as fission tracks a few million to a few 100 million years ago, and thermoluminescence dating, used to date clay pottery. Endnote 338. Note 339, Table 1. See your screen. Cleosynthesis. Note 340. Scientists estimate the universe unfolded from its state of infinite destiny. Note 341. Typo, destiny should read density. Endnote 341. A moment commonly referred to as the Big Bang, approximately 1.3 to 2 times 10 to the 10 years ago. Endnote 340. Note 342. The age of the Earth lies somewhere between 4.43 to 4.57 times 10 to the 9 years, roughly around the time our solar system formed. With a few exceptions, most meteors are younger. Micrometeorites, however, with high levels of deuterium, suggest evidence of interstellar material predating our solar system. See F. Tera. Congruency of comfortable galenas, Age of the Earth, 12th Lunar and Planetary Science Conference, 1981, pages 1088 to 1090, and IDR MacKinnon and FJM Rietmeijer, Mineralogy of Chondritic Interplanetary Dust Particles. Review of Geophysics, 1987, 25, pages 1527 to 1553. See also those particle age-related studies carried out by Klaus Bebelstein and Gunther Pollinger, published in Physics Today, Volume 48, September 1995, pages 24 to 30, as well as by the Oxford University Press, 1994, under the title Particle Exam, which includes, in Chapter 16, fascinating data generated at the Deutsche Elektron Synchrotron, DESY, pronounced Daisy, in Hamburg, and even input from the Hermes collaboration, which at the time was using the Hera electron-proton collider to study nucleon spin. Bebelstein and Pollinger have also written extensively on the recent, though highly speculative, claim that accurate algorithms must now exist, which are in keeping with wave origin reflection data series, as currently set forth by the VEM-TM Corporation. Endnote 342. Note 343. BGC. Berkeley Geochronology Center, Paul Renne. See Science, August 12, 1994, page 864. Endnote 343. Note 344. One must not forget the crater created by a meteor in the Arizona desert 50,000 years ago, Canyon Diablo, with a diameter of 1,207 meters and a depth of 174 meters. Endnote 344. Note 345. Internal isochron measurements of RBSR ages have shown the Norton County meteorite in the Albright group to have an age of 4.7 plus or minus 0.13 GA. 1 GA equals 10 to the 9 years. The Kronberg meteorite in the LL5 group has an estimated age of 4.7 plus or minus 0.01 GA. As Ojiri indicates to Navidson, several of the samples also appear to have ages predating the formation of the Earth, though the accuracy of those claims remains hotly contested. See D.W. Sears, The Nature and Origin of Meteorites, New York, Oxford University Press, 1978, page 129, and Bailey Rhian, Formation versus Metamorphic Age, Cambridge, Massachusetts, The MIT Press, 1996, pages 182 to 235, end note 345. ABC spoken language versus the Geo. Note 346. Robert T. Dodd, Meteorites, A Petrologic Chemical Synthesis, Cambridge, Cambridge University Press, 1981. Dodd also explains on page 161, a chondrite's first isotopic equilibration is usually called its formation. The time period between nucleosynthesis and formation is called the formation interval, and that between formation and the present formation age. The time difference between a later isotopic disturbance and the present is called a metamorphic age. We have known for a quarter century that all chondrites are approximately 4.55 billion years old, Patterson, 1956, and for a decade that their history up to and including metamorphism encompassed no more than 100 million years, Papanastassiou and Wasserburg, 1969. What parts of this brief high-temperature history were occupied by chondrule formation, accretion, and metamorphism has been and remains unclear, for it is not always easy to tell which stage a particular isotopic system records. Endnote 346. Note 347. Meteoritics, asteroids, comets, craters, interplanetary dust, interstellar medium lunar samples, meteors, meteorites, natural satellites, planets, tektites, origin and history of the solar system. Derek W.G. Sears, editor. Donald E. Brownlee, Michael J. Gaffey, Joseph I. Goldstein, Richard A.F. Grieve, Ryan Jones, Klaus Keil, Hiroko Nagahara, Frank Podosek, Ludolf Schultz, Dennis Shaw, S. Ross Taylor, Paul W. Warren, Paul Weissman, George W. Wetherill, Raina Weiler, Associate Editors. Published by the Meteoritical Society, Volume 30, Number 3, May 1995, page 244. Endnote 347. Note 348. A possible solution to the date line scheme detailed by Navidson and Ojiri. It certainly lends weight to those theories favoring the historical significance of the samples, though it does nothing to resolve the presence of extraterrestrial and possibly even interstellar matter. Endnote 348. Note 349. Therefore, Navidson's conclusion seems the only conclusion. Based on the evidence, sample A through sample appear to make up an exact chronological map, which, though simple, nevertheless still shows that inexplicably, the remainder of this footnote, along with 17 more pages of text, vanish from the manuscript supplied by Mr. Truant, editors. Endnote 349. Note 350. I wish I could say this mass of black X's was due to some mysterious ash or frantic act of deletion on Zampano's part. Unfortunately, this time I'm to blame. When I first started assembling the Navidson record, I arranged the various pages and scraps by chapter or subject. Eventually, I had numerous piles spread out across the room, usually placed a book or some heavy object on them to keep the isolated mounds from flying apart if there were a draft or I happened to bump one with my foot. On top of this particular chapter, I stupidly placed a bottle of German ink, 4001 Brilliant Schwartz or something. Who knows how long ago either, probably when I was still sketching pictures and tinkering with collages. Maybe in August, maybe as far back as February. Anyway, there must have been a hairline crack in the glass because all of the ink eventually tunneled down through the paper, wiping out almost 40 pages, not to mention seeping into the carpet below where it spread into a massive black bloom. The footnotes survived only because I hadn't incorporated them yet. They'd all been written out separately on a series of green index cards held together by a yellow rubber band. "17 pages missing." Navidson asks. Dr. Ojiri mulls this over, takes another sip of his coffee, eyes the samples again, and then finally shrugs. "Not much, really, though you've got yourself a nice range here." "Nothing peculiar or out of the ordinary?" Navidson presses. Ojiri shakes his head. "Well, except maybe the chronology." "Meaning?" Reston eases his wheelchair forward. "Your samples all fall into a very consistent scheme. Sample A is pretty young, a few thousand years old, while K is a few 100,000. Q over here is in the millions, and these, referring to, in the billions. Those last bits there are clearly meteoric." "Meteors?" Navidson shoots a look at Reston. Ojiri nods, picking up the sample marked. "In my opinion, rubidium-87, strontium-87 is the best dating method we have, yielding formation ages anywhere from 4.4 to 4.7 billion years old. If we place the age of the Earth at around 4.5 billion years old, it's pretty obvious these had to come from someplace other than here. I doubt lunar, but maybe interplanetary. Your last sample is by far the oldest and most interesting, a composite of younger material, 4.2 billion years old, combined with deuterium-rich particles suggesting that possibly, now I want to stress possibly here, but this deuterium could indicate matter older than even our solar system, interstellar perhaps. So there you have it, a very nice little vein of history." Reston wheels back around to the table, as if Dr. Ojiri's explanation should now somehow cast the samples in a new light. Nothing about them, however, has changed. As Gillian Fedette exclaimed on August 4th, 1996, at the Radon Conference in St. Paul, Minneapolis, not surprisingly, despite Ojiri's analysis, the samples continue to remain obdurate and lifeless. "Where did you say you got all this from?" Ojiri asks. "Antarctica." Primarily thanks to Ojiri's conclusions, some fanatics of the Navidson record assert that the presence of extremely old chondrites definitively proves extraterrestrial forces constructed the house. Others, however, claim the samples only support the idea that the house on Ash Tree Lane is a self-created portal into some other dimension. Note 351. A Lexicon of Improbable Theories. Blair Keepling, editor, San Francisco, Niflheim Press, 1996. In Chapter 13, Keepling credits the Navidson record with the revival of the Hollow Earth movement, tracing this implausible theory from the wobbly ratiocinations of John Cleves Symes, 1779 to 1829, through Raymond Bernard's The Hollow Earth, the Greatest Geographical Discovery in History, 1964, to Norma Cox's self-published pro-Nazi piece, Kingdoms Within Earth, 1985. Keepling reveals yet another bizarre subculture thriving in the Western world. Of course, even if this planet were truly a hollow globe, an absolute impossibility, Tom's dropped quarter still describes a space far greater than the Earth's radius, or even diameter. End note 351. As Justin Crape dryly remarked, both arguments are probably best attributed to the persistent presence of schizophrenia plaguing the human race. Note 352. Justin Crape's Pale Micturitions, Charleston, West Virginia, Kanawha Press, 1996, page 99, Endnote 352. Keener intellects, however, now regard scientific conjecture concerning the house as just another dead end. It would seem the language of objectivity can never adequately address the reality of that place on Ash Tree Lane. Perhaps the most significant thing gleaned from this segment is Navidson's persistent use of all the data. Note 353. See Exhibit 3 for all test results, including rubidium 87, strontium 87, potassium 40, argon 40, samarium 147, neodymium 143, dating, as well as a complete set of reports on uranium 235 and 238, contents in lead isotopes. Note 354. Don't worry, that thought crossed my mind too. Unfortunately, Exhibit 3 doesn't make up for the spillage back there because there is no Exhibit 3. Aside from a few notes, it's missing. I've looked everywhere, especially for the 0 folder. Nothing. Who knows? Maybe it's for the best. Today, for no reason in particular, I started thinking about Dr. Ogelmeyer, wondering what I might have found out if I'd had the money, if I'd taken the time to see his specialist, if I'd opted for the tests. Of course, if were a fifth, I'd be drunk, which I'm definitely not. Maybe that kind of confirmation is unnecessary anyway. Still, I wonder. I grew up on certain words I've never mentioned to Lud or anyone for that matter. Words orbiting around my mother mainly, sometimes whispered, more often written in letters my father would never have let me read had he lived. Now that I think about it, I guess I've always gravitated towards written legacies. Private land surrounded by great bewildering oceans. A description I don't entirely understand even as I write it down now, though the sense of adventure about words, that little L making so little difference, appeals to me. But to hell with the closing parentheses. Seek. Before I understood the significance of things like auditory hallucinations, verbigeration, word salad, derealization, depersonalization, I sensed in them all kinds of adventure. To reach their meaning would require a great journey, which I eventually found out was in fact true, though the destinations did not exactly turn out to be Edenic places full of gold leaf, opal, or intricately carved pieces of jade. Count yourself lucky if you've never wandered by the house of Kurt Schneider or Gabriel Langfeld, or if the criteria of the St. Louis, Taylor, and Abrams, or Research Diagnostic leave you puzzled. The New Haven Schizophrenia Index should give more than enough away. In my case, would Ogelmeyer have turned to those tools, or would he have begun first with a biological examination? Look for hyperactivity or dopaminergic systems. Check for an increase in norepinephrine, or more than likely run an MRI on my brain to see if the lateral and third ventricles were getting larger. Maybe he'd even take a peek at my delta activity on the good old electroencephalogram, EEG. What sort of data streams would be generated, and how conclusively could he or his specialists read them? I'll never know. Which is not to imply it's the wrong road. Quite the contrary. It's just not mine. All I hope for is a moment of rational thought and one shot at action before I'm lost to a great, saddening madness, pitched at the hands of my own stumbling biology. As it stands, I've dropped 18 pounds. A couple of eviction notices lie near my door. I feel like I haven't slept in months. My neighbours are scared of me. Whenever I pass them in that dim, brown-walled hall, which happens rarely, only when I have to go out for more tuna, books in the library, or to sell blood to buy candles, I hear them whisper about my night screams. He's the one, I'm sure of it. Shh, not so loud. For some reason, I've been thinking more and more about my mother and the way her life failed her, humiliated her with impulses beyond her command, broke her with year after year of the same. I never knew her that well. I remember she had amazing hair, like sunlight, extremely fine and whisked with silver, beautiful even when it was uncombed, and her eyes always seemed to brim with a certain tenderness when I visited. And though most of the time she whispered, Sometimes she spoke up, and then her voice would sound sweet and full, like chapel bells caroling in the foreign towns I'd eventually wander at dawn, echoing down those streets where I find myself in the spare light, rubbing my cold hands together, hopping around like a lunatic, waiting for the pastry shops to open so I could buy a piece of bread and a cup of hot chocolate. She also used to write me letters, always handwritten and full of strange coloured words. They'd started after my father was killed, loaded with advice and encouragement, and most of all faith. I don't know if I would have survived Raymond without them, but she was never that well, and eventually her words soured until, well, I wish I could just stick to thoughts of her hair and her brimming eyes and caroling bells in foreign towns at dawn. It's never that simple, though, is it? One day I received a letter in which she apologized for what she'd done. At first I thought she was talking again about the pan of oil she'd accidentally knocked to the floor when I was 4, but that wasn't it at all, though in an awful way her confession did change the way I began to view my scars. Their oceanic swirls now spelling out suspicion, and much too much doubt for me to really address properly. Anyhow, she was referring to a completely different event, when my father was finally forced to take her away to the whale when I was only 7. A day I cannot for the life of me remember. As she explained it, her thoughts at that time had entirely deteriorated. The burden of life seemed too much for her to bear, and therefore, in her mind, an impossible and even horrible burden to impose upon a child, especially her own. Based on these wild ratiocinations, she gathered me up in her arms and tried to choke me. It was probably a very brief attempt, maybe even comic. My father intervened almost immediately, and my mother was then taken away for her own safety. I guess I do remember that part. Someone saying my own safety. My father, I imagine. I suppose I also remember him leading her away. At least the shape of him in the doorway, with her, all blurred and in silhouette. Raymond knew a little about my mother's history, and he used to say it was a bad dream that got her. Nightmares, you know, he once told me with a grin, can mess you up permanently. I've seen it happen to buddies of mine. That's why you'll never catch me without a gun under my pillow. That'll get any man through the night. A week ago, I gave myself a Christmas present. I dug up my visa, which I still try my best to avoid using, and not only picked up a second gun, this time a stainless steel Taurus 605.357, but also went ahead and ordered a rifle. More specifically, I ordered a Weatherby 300 Magnum, along with 20 boxes of 180 grain core-locked rounds. I guess I'm hoping the weapons will make me feel better, grant me some kind of fucking control, especially if I sense the dullness inside me get too heavy and thick, warning me that something is again approaching, creeping slowly towards my room. No figment of my imagination either, but as tangible as you and I, never ceasing to scratch, fume and snort in awful rage, though it's still pausing outside my door, waiting, perhaps for a word or an order, or some other kind of sign to at last initiate this violent and by now inevitable confrontation. Always as full of wrath as I am as full of fear. So far nothing, though I still take the Taurus and the Heckler and Koch out of the trunk, load them, and just hang on the trigger. Sometimes for a few minutes, sometimes for hours, aiming at the door or the window or a ceiling corner cast in shadow. I even lie with them in bed, hiding under my sky blue sheets, trying to sleep, trying to dream, if only so I can remember my dreams. At least I'm not defenseless now. At least I have that, a gun in each hand, not afraid to shoot. Safety off. End note 354. To deny the internal shattering caused by Tom's death and Karen's flight. He only speculates with Reston about what it could mean that samples A through form a timeline extending back before the birth of even the solar system. He uses his camera to embrace the Princeton laboratory equipment, seek out the appeasement of numbers, all the while never openly reflecting on the very real absence continuing to penetrate his life. similar to the way Karen tried to rely on feng shui to mitigate the effects of the house. Navidson turns to the time-telling tick of radioactive isotopes to deny the darkness eviscerating him from within. Noda Venard believes the key to this sequence does not exist in any of the test results or geological hypotheses, but in the margin of a magazine, which, as we can see for ourselves, Navidson idly fills with doodles while waiting for Dr. Ojiri to retrieve some additional documentation. Mr. Navidson has drawn a bomb going off, an atom bomb, an inverted thermonuclear explosion which reveals in the black contours of its clouds the far-reaching shockwave and, of course, the great pluming head, the internal dimensions of his own sorrow. Note 355. See Noda Venard's frame detail delivered for the Symposium on the Cultural Effects of Nuclear Weaponry in the 21st Century, held at the Technical University of Denmark on October 19, 1996. Also see Matthew Coolidge's The Nevada Test Site, A Guide to America's Nuclear Proving Ground, Culver City, California, The Center for Land Use Interpretation, 1996, as well as Matthew Coolidge's Nuclear Proving Grounds of the World, Ed Sarah Simons, Culver City, California, The Center for Land Use Interpretation, 1998. Endnote 355. But even if that is indeed the best way to describe the shape of Navidson's emotional topology, it is still nothing compared to the vision the house ultimately prepares for him. As Professor Virgil Q. Tomlinson observes, that place is so alien to the kingdom of the imagination, let alone the eye, so perfectly unholy, hungry, and inviolable, it easily makes a 4th of July sparkler out of an A-bomb and reduces the aliens of the X-Files and the Outer Limits to Sunday morning funnies. Note 356. See Virgil Q. Tomlinson's Nothing Learned, Nothing Saved, by Suggestion of Science, in Geo, Volume 83, February 7th, 1994, page 68. Glossary. Deuterium. A hydrogen isotope twice the mass of ordinary hydrogen, needed for heavy water. Diachronic. Relating to the historical developments and changes occurring in language. D structure, deep structure, the tree providing a place for words as defined by phrase structure rules. Igneous, rocks formed from magma, molten material, classified on the basis of texture and mineral composition. Examples, granite, basalt, pumice. Interstellar, originating or occurring among the stars. Isotope, one of two or more forms of an element with the same atomic number and chemical behavior, but different atomic mass. Linguistics, study of the structure, sounds, meaning, and history of language. Metamorphic, pre-existing rocks reformed by heat and pressure. Examples, slate and marble. Meteors, non-terrestrial objects surviving passage through the Earth's atmosphere, often divided into three groups: siderites, iron meteorites, aerolites, meteorites primarily composed of silicates, and siderolites, stony iron meteorites. Morpheme, smallest meaningful part of a word. Nucleosynthesis, creation of nucleons, neutrons, and protons, typically discussed when formulating theories about the origins of the universe. Sedimentary, rocks created from hardened layers of sediment comprised of organic and inorganic material, classified on the basis of chemical and particle shape and size. Examples, sandstone, shale, and coal. Semantics, study of the relationship between words and meaning. Spectrometer, an instrument calibrated to measure transmitted energy, whether radiant intensities at various wavelengths, the refractive indices of prism materials, or radiation. S structure, surface structure, the phrase tree formed when applying movement transformations to the D structure. Synchronic, concerning language as it exists at a single point in time. Trace, a silent element in a sentence which still indicates the D structure position of a moved phrase.